10 o'clock on the West Coast. It is 10 o'clock on the West Coast of the United States. It's 0500 GMT. It's cBass After Dark for the 13th of May, 2015. That's delicious. Oh, boy. Got a new AC adapter for the old machine here, and it's just wanting to slide the crap right off the damn table here, and I'm trying desperately to put something on it so that it doesn't slide off the damn table here. So if you don't mind bearing with me just for a moment, I can block it and prevent what just happened from happening again, and that's what I will do. Thanks for being here. It's Media Watch Wednesday. Got a lot going on, including a look at the new set of Sesame Street. It's pretty cool. They're doing a remodel, if you will, or a makeover. M is for makeover, I believe the article said. Also coming up, American Idol. It's the end of a crappy era in television. Thank Christ almighty, American Idol is going away. Not till after next year. The Spectrum auction. What the heck does that mean? It's the spectrum of the electromagnetic thing, and they're auctioning it off. You could buy a piece of the electromagnetic spectrum if you have enough money. Actually, broadcasters are the ones really interested in it, and the FCC is going to have that thing coming up in just a couple of years. Big follow-up in our Comcast report from last week. And oh, holy crap, Comcast is finding new ways to take revenge on America. It's actually pretty funny. The man who broke the music business. The New Yorker had a pretty interesting article about the dawn of online piracy. The man who broke the internet, they call it, or broke the music business, I mean. And he's, I guess, the one who invented Napster, I believe. We're going to look at that. Also, the late night television. Many people like late night TV of one sort or another. Many people think the current late night TV is kind of crappy. We will have a look at the oldest of the old late night programs. A guy whose name was Beanbag, and is the title of this article on Slate.com is "The First Ever Late Night Show Was Insane. Why Have We Never Heard of It?" It's really amazing. This story. They apparently are having a series on Slate because also somebody went to all of the late night TV shows, the current ones. Somebody, Seth Stevenson, the author here for Slate.com, went to tapings of every late night show, and he sort of had an article about what he learned. Since this is kind of a late night show, maybe that's where I should start. But no, where I want to start is where I really want to start. That's the death of a crappy era in American broadcasting. At least we know when it's coming. American Idol, going the fuck away. Thank merciful God. Now, I mean, it's not the worst of the reality TV out there. It's just a fucking singing contest. But it is ugliness incarnate, and boy, do I hate it. Always have, always will. Fox executives explained on a conference call it was not an easy decision. We collectively just arrived at the conclusion it was time to bring the show to an end. We're going to have the last season be a true season-long celebration. God, can you imagine the American Idol masturbation that will be going on next season? It's pretty freaking annoying and ugly. So I can only imagine, and I'm not going to be watching any of it. It's completely off my radar screen. I mean, the good ones the ones I have watched, and I have not watched whole seasons. I've only watched occasional episodes. But yes, stars you know today, like Ruben Studdard, could be continuing to make waves in the American culture. You know what? Just out of shits and giggles, I actually did not plan to do this, but let's go on and look at Ruben Studdard now. I guess what I'll look at is his Wikipedia page. Not that that's a guaranteed good source, but that's where I'll start. Now let's just go Ruben Studdard Google. Not Ruben. Born in 78. He's the winner. Biggest Loser gave him a second chance, so he was on The Biggest Loser. I guess he lost 119 pounds on The Biggest Loser. Isn't that great? That's in that article from Today.com. The 15th season of The Biggest Loser. He starred as Fats Waller in a national tour in Misbehavin'. He toured with Robin Givens in a comedy drama. I mean, I guess he's had an album more or less every couple of years, but it's like, I don't know anybody who's listened to a Ruben Studdard song. I don't know anybody who lives for Ruben Studdard or is, sitting up at night waiting to click on buying tickets when he comes to town. I mean, I know lots of people who love lots of musical acts. Music does not impress me for the most part because I like very, very specific things that most people don't like. So when it comes to like people who are mainstream or whatever, like I was going to say Miley Cyrus, she's a singer, isn't she? Or Katy Perry or Nicki Minaj, any of that kind of modern day musical crap is completely off my radar screen, and I delight in that. But anytime somebody's like, American Idol, I'm like, yeah, Ruben Studdard, he won. He's nowhere. He's nobody's favorite. Nobody cares about Ruben Studdard. Even the guy who did become popular that year, Clay Aiken, is essentially not really doing much. I think he ran for office politically, or is running for political office, but he didn't get anywhere. I'm like, it's just pretty embarrassing. All right. So there's that. The best story I have to start with is that American Idol going away after next season. Next season's going to be an incredibly gushy, masturbatory season, and I'm going to have to sort of bite my teeth to get through that. But thank God for American Idol going away. Here's kind of a boring story. The auction. Nearly every major broadcast CEO is seriously eyeing the Spectrum auction. What's the Spectrum auction? Well, they're going to auction off sections of the electromagnetic spectrum from the FCC so that broadcasters can use it. They're going to put Spectrum up for auction, according to the FCC's Tom Wheeler. He's the chairman. Fox, Ion, Tribune, and Univision have all signaled they could be players at the right price, likely by giving up second channels, duopoly markets, and moving programming to a multicast channel on the primary, or giving up spectrum but making deals to share a channel with another station. This all gets real complicated real fast. If you're not a broadcaster, you often don't know or care about this stuff. But they're not going to know until they open the doors. The auction is still slated for early 2016, so it's at least 8 months away. ISPs, blah, blah, blah. Why the FCC did not wait for Congress to weigh in. He did not answer that part of the question. Wheeler would not speculate on the legal costs the FCC would incur from defending the new open internet rules. But yeah, so the Spectrum auction is coming up. Can I just click that and see what it will come up with? This is broadcastingcable.com, by the way, a really good source for, let's see here. Really good source for broadcasting news, but probably not interesting to the general public. Let's follow up on Comcast from last week. If you were here, you saw my hour completely devoted to the train wreck that is Comcast, that is the owner of NBC, for one thing. That was not what we focused on. What we focused on, for the most part, was their shitty customer service and how they're really saying they're going to try hard and bend over freaking backwards to win the customers back and be the very major model of a modern major customer service initiative, and on and on and on. But we've all heard the phone calls. We've all seen the stories. Comcast's customer service is atrocious, and they appear punitive. Like, they appear to punish people who don't do things the Comcast way. They allegedly got a guy fired for complaining about their bad customer service because he complained to somebody high up in Comcast, like a VP of accounting or something like that, and ended up, because he worked for a company that was a Comcast affiliated, like PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they did consulting, or I don't really get all of the niceties of it, but essentially the higher up who he called to complain to, the guy who he called to complain to in Comcast was so high up and was so sort of upset with the guy that he allegedly called the guy's employer, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to get him fired. Now, Comcast is now claiming they did not do that. Comcast is claiming that, but somebody somewhere high up called somebody somewhere over here high up and said, hey, who's this guy you have working for you who's making trouble for me? Take care of him. And they took care of him. They fired him. And he's got a lawsuit now, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I really hope he wins. But let's look at a couple of stories following up on the Comcast bullshit. The first and foremost one is this. Ever since that merger is dead with Comcast and Time Warner Cable, Charter looks ready to pounce. What is Charter? Well, reports are already beginning to spread about Charter, another cable company that is going to approach Time Warner Cable with an offer of its own. They'll know they have more to offer than they did a year ago, but now that the Comcast merger has been shut down, one less obstacle in the way of a Charter, a Time Warner deal. What I've said repeatedly, the Time Warner Cable CEO says, is that we are in the business of maximizing shareholder value, and we fully intend to fulfill that obligation. That could be achieved by running the business on a standalone basis, allocating capital smartly, managing our balance sheet, or engaging in an M&A as acquirer or a seller. So they could be bought, they could buy, but they're not commenting specifically, as you might expect. The other really good Comcast story this year. Oh, well, let's read this. Don't celebrate yet. Comcast will find new ways to take revenge on America. This from that BGR.com blog. It's a telling quote. He doesn't lose, ever, reported about CEO Brian Roberts of Comcast in the wake of the failure to win approval. When Comcast officially called off its merger, it did so without the same sense of entitled rage that AT&T had when its proposed merger with T-Mobile fell through. AT&T issued a scathing response to the FCC in that case. But instead, Roberts simply said it was time to move on. Here's the thing. Comcast has a lot of good options for major acquisitions that don't involve buying up the second largest cable company. In fact, opponents of Time Warner Comcast merger should expect Comcast to come back in the near future with a more well thought out plan to make big acquisitions that won't piss off the antitrust regulators. Like what? They could get into wireless by buying Sprint or T-Mobile. Imagine that. Comcast is now your wireless company, your cell phone company. Wouldn't you love that? I don't know anybody who likes their wireless company, but I know even more people who hate Comcast. So you put those two hatred-filled, handfuls together, and you get one gigantic mass of insanity. That would effectively give Comcast a way to take on AT&T and Verizon, which both already deliver home broadband and video services as well as wireless. Comcast is the only one that does internet and broadband and video without a wireless service. Of course, Comcast has its own broadcast TV network as well, NBC. Deutsche Telekom has been trying to unload T-Mobile, so that could be a factor. Sprint is also a possibility because despite making more aggressive moves of its own, why will my mouse not work? Okay. Sprint's parent company, SoftBank, would more likely happily unload the carrier onto a buyer that blew them away with a quality offer, and Comcast is poised to do just that. Or Comcast could buy Netflix. Netflix has no control shareholders, and we have to imagine the board would listen to a truly compelling offer from Comcast. The question, though, is whether Comcast will learn from Netflix or whether it will simply Comcastify the hugely popular streaming service. Let's recall that Wall Street Journal reported Comcast has been instrumental in keeping Hulu down because Comcast is more interested in having consumers use its own X1 set-top box instead of a third-party app like Hulu that can be used on any device. So if Hulu doesn't have a lot of good stuff and you complained about that or wondered why Hulu doesn't have a lot of good stuff, Comcast is part of the reason why there. Hopefully neither scenario comes to pass, says this author, or that they only come to pass after Comcast has taken a long look in the mirror. Now, the truth is this article was written, I think, before the article about Comcast pissing everybody off and then trying to win back its customers with its award-winning customer service or whatever it's trying to do. But, yeah, watch out for Comcast to try additional bullshit. What do you mean, cBas? How is Comcast going to try additional bullshit when they're trying to be a customer service venture? They're trying to be a juggernaut in customer service. Not just customer service, good customer service. Not just good, but great customer service. What could Comcast do that would somehow keep its customers down? I've got a story for you, dear watcher, dear viewer, dear listener. Holy fucking shit. You're not going to believe this next story about Comcast because I almost couldn't believe it. That's Ruben stuttered. Hold on. Here we go. Comcast tried to make a customer sign an NDA. What is an NDA? Here's your money. Please don't tell anyone. An NDA is an abbreviation for a non-disclosure agreement. Comcast tried to tell a customer that they were going to refund $600 in bogus charges, but you got to sign this confidentiality form. You cannot talk about it to the media. What kind of bullshit is that? Like, I mean, are you absolutely kidding me? They're trying to silence their customers because they realize bad press is what's going to cause problems for them. Well, guess what they did? When John and Carol Lehman tried to get a $600 refund from Comcast for payments on a cable box they say they gave back to the company 5 years ago, Comcast offered them the money on one condition: sign a non-disclosure agreement. Might seem like a good tactic for avoiding the kind of bad press that has long plagued Comcast, but it didn't work. The NDA was apparently given to the customers after they had already gone to the media. 6 ABC Action News in Philadelphia had the story this week. The news spot played a recording of a Comcast representative telling the Lehmans, "We will issue a $600 even credit pending that you sign a non-disclosure agreement." 6 ABC also showed the full non-disclosure agreement. We made a transcript so you can read the whole thing. And here it is. Individual release in full of all claims and rights. Said payment of said amount is not to be construed as an admission of liability on the part of Comcast, but that said payment is in compromise and settlement of my claim, which is not admitted but is denied and disputed by Comcast. All right, that's kind of standard legal bullshit, but at the same time, not only is this not an admission of guilt on our part, we dispute and deny what you're saying, but we're paying this in a compromise scenario. Okay, that's nonsense. And then here we go. It is further understood and agreed that releasor will not disclose or allow to be disclosed any of the negotiations regarding this matter or the terms, conditions, or amounts of settlement, except as may be required by law, provided blah, 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 blah. Where's the part about talking to the media? Is that it, or is there a part up here? I guess it's up here. I'm just reading here. Anyway, that's a non-disclosure agreement is essentially that. According to 6 ABC News, the Lehmans tell us for 5 years, Comcast erroneously charged them for a cable box they'd actually turned in. They say they have all their bills, 5 years worth, to prove it. Station spoke to 3 sets of customers who say they had a difficult time getting refunds from Comcast, but they ultimately got all their money back after 6 ABC got involved. Comcast said, "We have apologized to our customers and these issues have since been resolved to their satisfaction." Comcast told the news station recent improvements, such as a measure that lets customers drop off equipment at UPS stores, will help prevent future problems like the one spotlighted in the report. "My advice, ask for and keep your receipt," reporter Nadia Hahn said in concluding the piece. "We've asked Comcast for more information and will provide an update." Here's an update. Comcast told Ars Technica, the website we're reading here, that it was a mistake to ask the customer to sign an NDA in the case of a billing dispute. NDAs are intended for out-of-the-ordinary situations, including disputes that involve property damage, but not routine matters like refunds. Comcast says it will clarify with its employees that the NDAs are not to be used in billing issues. The customer did receive the refund, they report again. So, yeah, there's the story about our good friends at Comcast and with the links they will go to, and now they're saying they won't anymore. But if you need a refund from Comcast, if they mess up for 5 years, by the way, that's the other thing. The guy that allegedly got fired after calling to complain about this, these were problems that weren't for a week or a month. They were for well over a year. You know, this is month after month after month after month after month. That the problems not only continued or stayed the same status quo, they compounded, they got worse, they grew in magnitude. One like he was away for several weeks and came back to all this equipment, boxes and boxes of equipment that he had not ordered and did not want, but they were piling up outside his house. It's a good thing that shit didn't get stolen, because then he would have been on the hook for it, or I mean, potentially. I don't put it past Comcast to, not try to do any of that stuff. And I think it's pretty telling. By the way, also the other story I wanted to read, just to make sure we act like we're not completely annihilating Comcast only on this story. Let's look at this story here. Verizon and Sprint pay $158 million in fines for fraudulent phone charges. Verizon and Sprint have agreed, again from ArsTechnica.com, to pay a combined $158 million settlement to settle allegations that they hit cellular customers with unauthorized third-party charges. It's a practice known as cramming. Most of the money will go toward customer refunds. The FCC and FTC announced the settlements earlier this month. Previously, regulators forced T-Mobile and AT&T to pay $90 million and $105 million, respectively. Investigations revealed that Verizon and Sprint billed customers millions of dollars in unauthorized third-party premium text messaging services, a practice called cramming. The monthly charge for these third-party premium text messaging services ranged from 99 cents to $14, but were typically $9.99 a month. Verizon retained 30% or more of each third-party charge that it billed. Sprint got about 35% of collected revenues for each of its charges. Numerous consumers have complained to the FCC and other agencies and the carriers themselves that they never requested or authorized those services they were being charged for. Customers who called to complain were often denied refunds, and yet when the FCC requested proof that customers had authorized charges, the carriers couldn't prove it. Verizon will pay $90 million, with $70 million being distributed to customers in refunds. Sprint will pay $68 million, including $50 million in refunds to customers. The remainder goes to state governments that participated in these settlement negotiations. The major carriers agreed to stop the fraudulent billing back in 2013, but the settlement with Verizon and Sprint say the practice continued into 2014. The settlements require the carriers to no longer offer commercial third-party PSMS charges, premium SMS charges. Often, they also have to obtain informed consent from customers prior to allowing third-party charges. They have to clearly and conspicuously identify third-party charges on bills, offer a free service for customers to block all third-party charges, and regularly report to the FCC. I'm not a big fan of the FCC in many cases. I like them for their net neutrality work. Hopefully that will stick. And I like that they occasionally do good stuff like this. Current and former Verizon customers can submit claims. There are also websites for AT&T and T-Mobile customers to request their refunds as well. Of course, those things almost always hinge on you having bills saved with the charges highlighted in yellow. So make sure you have that in the event you're going to. Interesting. AT&T working on throttling its unlimited LTE customers. Now they're facing a lawsuit, and so now they're only throttling 4G customers only if the network is congested. Have you been throttled? By the way, in case you're interested in chatting with me at all, this is the phone number 310-776-COONS, and this is the name on Twitter you can send a message to in case you have been throttled in any way by your cellular phone company. AT&T customers who used 5 gigs of data in a single monthly billing period were throttled for the rest of the month at all times, barely receiving usable service, despite paying for unlimited data. AT&T is now facing a Federal Trade Commission lawsuit over the practice. They've denied wrongdoing, but they promised they would change the policy to make it more lenient before the end of this year. AT&T did not officially announce this change, but it's now apparent in the policy detailed on its website. As a result of AT&T's management process, customers on a 3G or 4G smartphone or on a 4G LTE smartphone with an unlimited data plan who have exceeded 3 gigabytes, 3G and 4G, or 5 gigabytes, 4G LTE, in a billing period may experience reduced speeds when using data services at times and in areas experiencing network congestion. All such customers can still use unlimited data without incurring overage charges, and their speeds will be restored with the start of the next billing cycle. Before the change, which apparently happened overnight, the text showed different policies for LTE and non-LTE customers. It said customers on a 3G or 4G smartphone with an unlimited data plan who exceed 3 gigs may experience reduced speeds when using data services at times and in areas that are experiencing network congestion. Customers on a 4G LTE smartphone will experience reduced speeds once their usage in a billing cycle exceeds 5 gigs of data. LTE users with unlimited data plans have seen speeds drop below half a megabit per second when being throttled by AT&T. By imposing this policy, AT&T encouraged customers to switch to more expensive plans introduced in the years after AT&T stopped selling unlimited data. Despite AT&T claiming that it needs to throttle unlimited users in order to manage its network, it lets customers on limited plans use far more than 5 gigs a month without being throttled as long as they pay for it. AT&T still faces potential punishment if it loses the case. by the FCC. Last month, a federal judge rejected AT&T's claim that it cannot be sued. The FTC is seeking refunds for millions of customers who were promised unlimited data, not unlimited with an asterisk, but unlimited data. The FCC, by the way, has tried to shame carriers into stopping the practice of throttling and succeeded in preventing Verizon from throttling. Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon all use throttling to some extent, but only in times and places of congestion. AT&T could have faced action from the FCC, whose new net neutrality rules against throttling take effect next month. The rules say throttling can only be done for reasonable network management purposes. Wheeler has said reasonable network management cannot be used as a loophole to enhance revenue. The FCC could still examine AT&T's throttling, but the company's new policy is more likely than its old one to meet the reasonable management test. So, again, the change is that they're throttled only when they connect to congested cell towers. So if you're able to connect to a non-congested cell tower, it looks like you won't be throttled, at least temporarily. So another really interesting story that I like covering here. It's one of those things where I feel like it's not necessarily interesting to a lot of people, but then again, if you have an unlimited data plan that you bought specifically because it's an unlimited data plan, then when they decide to slow you down because, well, yeah, you're paying for unlimited, but what's unlimited in life? Unlimited is not something you get in real life. Well, guess what, asshole? Yeah, it is. You offered it. We wouldn't have it if you hadn't offered it initially. And some of those people who are grandfathered into the unlimited data probably won't let it go, until it's pried from their cold dead hands. And I cannot disagree with that. Again, I don't get throttled because I don't really use more than 5 gigs of data in a month, but I don't have the unlimited thing anymore. And I'm sorry I ever gave that up. You're watching cBaS After Dark. This is Media Watch Wednesday. Feel free to call here or tweet here. You can also text this number, 310-776-5867. Sorry, I should not have eaten that Junior Mint, but I wanted something minty in my mouth. Okay, let's look at late night TV. By the way, coming up, we're going to look at the Sesame Street set. They had a makeover, and it's really cool. The first ever late night show was insane. Why have we never heard of it? This from Slate.com. Every late night variety program has some sort of signature bit. Top 10 for David Letterman, Carnac the Magnificent from Johnny Carson, Arsenio Valls, woof, woof, woof. Jerry Lester, the late night host who preceded them all, liked to talk about beanbags. Just call me Beanbag, Lester would croon at the beginning of the Broadway open house. It was the first late night variety program. What year? 1950, 1951. Lester wore ties festooned with tiny beanbags. The song was called the Beanbag Song. He used the term as a term of approbation, like hip or cool. He received beanbags in the mail from fans. He founded an organization called the Beanbag Club, and within months it had 750,000 members in the 1950s. This is before Twitter. All right, this is before Facebook. I would kill to have 750,000 of people on my Twitter feed, let's say, or people watching this show. I don't have anywhere near that, and this is the internet age. This guy had 750,000 members in his Beanbag Club within months of it, and I've never heard of it. You've heard of Johnny Carson. You may remember the people who guest hosted for him, whether it was Joan Rivers. I think David Letterman did a few times. Obviously, Jay Leno guest hosted regularly and became the host. And now Jimmy Fallon's the host, blah, blah, blah. But whoever heard of Beanbag? Here's a clip of it. Let's just watch this 1-minute clip because you can't believe it. Broadway Open House, it was called.
Don't get nervous now. Here is the fellow who started the show. They're running it rocky. Jerry Lester is his name. Just call me Beanbag.
There he is. Pre-Carson, pre-Leno, pre-Letterman. And by the way, I'm going to hit pause right there because one thing I automatically, instantaneously love about this, maybe you'll disagree. It's done from the side. The camera is off to the side. The audience is in the background, and he's kind of doing this number, going back and forth between the live audience on one side of him and the camera on the other. He's not facing the audience. The audience is not invisible to the cameras. in anything but the main shot, like the bump shots of, the bumper shots where you see the camera swooping through and stuff, you very often do see the audiences in the modern day late night shows. But I love that this guy does it kind of sideways. Holy shit, isn't that awesome?
Welcome to another Tuesday night review in honor of the pretzel maker right here. You know, we just came back from Detroit and we had a wonderful stay. We played the St. Joseph Festival out there. We had a wonderful stay at the Whittier Hotel, and we also got blocked off in Cleveland, and we want to thank the people.
All right, so that's where it stops. But Broadway Open House was what it was called. The host was named Beanbag. He didn't do it every night. This article talks about his inexplicable beanbag fixation, indicates the manic non-linearity of the show. It was a short-lived show that pioneered the late-night comedic variety format and remains the most peculiar program to ever fill that slot. From May 50 to August 51, Broadway Open House filled the national airwaves 5 nights a week with jokes, catchphrases, novelty songs, innuendos, and improv. By now, the late-night variety format is so familiar as to almost seem genetic. Monologue, sketches, guests, music, credits. Broadway Open House deserves some credit for developing that template and giving subsequent variety shows a model to follow. Almost entirely unscripted, produced and performed with no model for audiences with no expectations to fulfill, Broadway Open House was an inherently weird and wonderful program, the sort of weirdness that comes from having no model to follow and thus no one to tell you that you're doing it wrong. Pioneers often are pioneers for several reasons, and there may be a whole spectrum of reasons, maybe because they're even forced to be a pioneer in some way. But when you're doing something new, there's a freedom there. Jimmy Fallon has to fit into a certain idea of what a late night host is. And I mean, he's got his own take on this template, but he has to follow the template, to reinvent any of this show would result in some kind of weird, viewer departure. I feel like it would result in a revolt by the audiences of mainstream America, because mainstream America is not all that bright very often. And I feel like probably would not appreciate having what they're used to adjusted. I see it in my parents all the time, where anything that's not done the way it's always been done is anathema. It's bad. And whether it's something as simple as going from right to left through the grocery store instead of left to right. Like, I've often been completely blown away by how if you go any way other than left to right through the grocery store, my dad gets completely sort of lost and messed up and stuff like that. And that's his idiosyncrasy, but I feel like a lot of old people have that in spades, where you get used to things a certain way. Sheldon Cooper calls it consistency, right? But very often, the scientific studies I've seen, for one thing, indicate that's what leads to or allows Alzheimer's to develop, is never doing things in a different way, never speaking in anything but your native language, never writing in anything but the pen, the hand that you're used to writing with, never playing any music, never exercising other areas of your brain or doing things in a different way so that the routine becomes so automatic. You know what I'm saying? I just have to appreciate a pioneer. Now, what he's pioneering is something we're all used to. So seeing this is kind of like meh for some people, like who gives a shit. But I feel like seeing the first person to do the late night format is very astounding. And I like the guy. Like, I love the way the camera shot was set up, as I mentioned. I like his sort of manic, I only saw 60 seconds of it there, but now it makes me curious enough to want to see more. Very often I am turned off in the first 5 seconds of something that I've watched. And very often I'll sit through it for maybe 15 minutes if I don't like it, just to make sure I'm sure I don't like it and not just being a dick. But very often when I like something, I like it almost as instantaneously. And I like this guy named Beanbag. The rest of what this article says talks about how it was actually designed as a scheme to sell beer bottles. In the spring of 1950, Anchor Hocking wanted to improve its relationship with beer breweries and hopefully dissuade them from using plastic containers or aluminum cans to package beer. The company devised a novel strategy. It would sponsor a nightly TV program on NBC and redistribute advertising time on the program to its brewery clients offering them local cut-in announcements, plugging the beers according to the appropriate distribution. This is from Billboard. By this scheme, Anchor Hawking would lure the brewers, and the brewers would lure the layabout drunks who had nowhere to be in the mornings. The rest, as they say, is TV history. Program is to be a low-budget review, produced by NBC. Music, dancing, comedy sketches, the occasional celebrity guest, and a quick-witted host to hold everything together. It was set to debut in 1950. Its host was to be manic prop comic and pianist Don Creesh Hornsby, whose live performances, who occasionally lasted for 5 hours at a time, combined aggressive absurdism with extreme over-caffeination. Accounts of the act place it firmly in "you had to be there" territory. I really like that sentence right there. To try to watch it or to try to read about it would not make sense. You had to be there. Hornsby would swing, according to this book he wrote, Hornsby would swing, Ben Alba is the author here, Hornsby would swing from a trapeze bar while engaging in nonstop patter, or he would run around the stage yelling, "Creesh, Creesh." He would point a high-beam railroad yard flashlight at startled audience members and engage them in comical banter. Take that, Steve Allen. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I suppose, depending on your tolerance for being blinded by flashlights, Hornsby contracted polio and died a week before Broadway Open House was to debut. They scrambled to find a replacement, and they found two. That is a problem. I can tell you off the top of my head that would not work. Maury Amsterdam, who some people have heard of, would later find fame as a supporting guy on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and Jerry Lester, a peripatetic comedian, dancer, juggler, and tightrope walker who, after 2 decades in the entertainment business, had yet to find an outlet suitable for his talents. The network decided Amsterdam would host Mondays and Wednesdays, Lester would host Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. This was a terrible idea. It put the shows in competition with each other and inhibited performative consistency. Maury Amsterdam was fired in November 1950 by an unsatisfied Anchor Hawking and replaced by a succession of guest hosts, but Lester stayed on. This author went to the Paley Center for Media to view a couple of episodes. I can say without exaggeration, it's one of the most exhausting and confusing shows I have ever seen. Again, I love that description. The show's individual elements are all familiar, slightly off, like a clumsy outsider art rendition of a late-night TV program. It's a show broadcast live from the Uncanny Valley. And it goes on. Let's see. Lester spent nearly 10 minutes in the audience asking random audience members to recite their high school fight cheers. I mean, it was very, very kind of spontaneous sounding. It was very, very unrehearsed, unwritten, unplanned. Like, I mean, it just seemed like, I don't know. There was the occasional hot woman. What was the word? They talk about the hot lady who was on TV to kind of draw in the viewer. Back to this article. There's an obnoxious tamp dancer named Ray Malone who screeches like Jerry Lewis whenever he speaks. The band leader was Milton DeLugue, who plays not only the accordion but also carries it around with him. Instead of musical guests, he features the Mellow Larks, a jazz pianist and comic foil named Fletcher Peck. Blah, 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 blah. Here's another minute-long clip.
Yo, bro, you on woo-woo?
Well, of course, there's going to be an ad for 30 seconds. The show's breakout star was the uncharismatic and monotonous Dagmar, née Jenny Lewis, née Virginia Ruth Egnor, a tall West Virginian blonde lady whose job was to sit on stage for the entire show, wear a low-cut dress, and occasionally come on stage to be leered at. Dagmar was billed as the singer for the Broadway Open House band, but the running joke was that she never sang. I think that is awesome and hilarious and funny to me.
Dagmar. You know Eddie?
Oh, is this her?
Eddie Watson, this is Dagmar.
There she is, okay.
What type of coat for a tall girl like Dagmar?
Well, I think we ought to go to the contrasting size rather than color this time. What do you say, a little spring garment, like a breath of spring? Could you,
I started like
what is the camera doing?
I've seen them look like lumps, but first time I heard it called.
Is this a stole?
This is what we call a breath of spring stole. It's the type of mink. It's a very, very rare type of bird, and if I may say so, very, very beautiful bird. There, right?
I'm wondering if this up and down thing we're seeing is a result of like the kinescope.
That's nice.
That's one of the nice ways to wear it.
Huh? That's nice.
I can hardly wait a word.
Wait a minute. I think the ladies would be interested in that. Would you do that once more, Eddie? This goes over the shoulder, and this.
That's right. There's one other way we can do it. We can sort of swing it over here on the colder days, like this. Swing it around like that. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're messing my hair up.
I'll have your hair glazed in the morning.
No, thank you. I do it myself.
All right.
Well, Dagmar, because you're so nice, and because Eddie is so nice, you may have that.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr.
thank
Lester.
you. I don't get anything out of
Wow,
it.
she gives him a big kiss. And
They haven't got a full-length coat like that, have they?
okay, so there you have that. Again, it's a little weird. Instead, she purveyed deadpan malapropisms that inevitably set Lester off in spasms of sexual innuendo. And just sort of reading this, but again, okay, let's see this 30-second clip here.
This is the day for incision. The day I must get my hand in marriage.
Ah, Princess Humphrey Maya! How do you do?
This is Prince Glockenspiel. He is one of my sweaters. Thank you.
Sweaters, suitors.
Or sweaters isn't bad either, you know.
Okay. Okay, here we go. I like this also. Milton DeLugg was one of the people, maybe the musical guy, recalled the scripts as examples of comic minimalism. It was like Jerry opens door, DeLugg walks out wearing accordion and says something. You know? I mean, that's all the script was just that stuff. The imprecision was the key to the program's success. The written material, oh, back on me, I didn't mean for that to happen. I thought you were still watching the article here. Yeah, the imprecision was the key to the success. The written material was usually reliant on trite comic scenarios. The real magic came in the spontaneous moments, as a show did. The variety show format fit Lester very well. Lester wasn't very handsome or a very good actor or singer. He wasn't the sort who could carry a movie or a scripted TV show, but he was winning. And he was the first person to realize that in the late night world, being likable was more important than being talented. If they like you, you don't have to worry about whether every gag goes over big or if the sketch is the best thing they have ever seen. He liked his audiences, they liked him, but other conflicts got in the way. Lester left Broadway Open House reportedly upset that Dagmar's popularity was eclipsing his own. Broadway went off the air permanently in August '51, so he didn't leave that early. 3 years later, they tried out the late night format again, calling it The Tonight Show. So that we all know of. Ed McMahon apparently wrote about this, watching this show, Broadway Open House, as a fledgling, frustrated broadcaster, saying, "I wonder if this show will ever be replaced by a professional one," Ed McMahon remembered thinking. And of course, we all know what he ended up doing. So, gosh, you know, the great Ed McMahon was watching this show and sort of going, God, this is not good. And that bothers me because I watch the show and I'm like, dude, I would so watch this show. I mean, it would be better if I had a head full of, you know, pot first. But again, you know, that's just personal. Let's fast forward a little bit. By the way, coming up still, the tour of the new Sesame Street set, as brought to us by an article in the internet not too long ago, very recently, in fact. But here's another article from Slate.com where the author went to a taping of each of the late night shows and just kind of shared his learnings. This article is called YouTube Killed the Studio Audience. Seth Stevenson is his name. There's David Letterman from behind there. Attending the taping of a late night TV show is not a comfortable experience. First, you'll stand in line on a city sidewalk for hours, being herded like a fatted calf to an abattoir. Upon arriving at the head of the line, you're often tagged with a wristband and instructed to return in an hour so you can stand in a different line. When you finally enter the building, you'll be squeezed into a musty back hallway or barren anteroom. Here, you'll cool your heels for a second eternity, wondering whether the free tickets these shows all hand out are somehow far too expensive. Once you're seated and warned never to look at your phone or else be ejected, you'll often sit on your hands for another soul-sapping half hour, watching production assistants and camera operators mill about on an otherwise empty stage. At some point, a warm-up comic comes out, accompanied by a brief fanfare of rock music. This man will wear jeans and touch his hair a lot. He'll probably tell you his Twitter handle. You'll be so ecstatic that something, anything at all, is occurring, you'll forgive him for being a chump. He will tell 4 jokes before commencing the warm-up process, which will mostly entail him commanding you to applaud for no reason, again and again, as he complains that your applause should be far more robust. You'll then be forced to laugh out loud on cue, looking around in discomfort at the rictuses of your neighbors. I've been to a few of these before, an early Leno taping, he says, blah, blah, blah. But as the final days of Letterman approached, he decided to see as many tapings as he could. I thought that maybe by observing these shows up close and in person, I might reveal the seams of their construction. What's the atmosphere like at each? At Late Night with Seth Meyers, where the guy who warmed up the crowd seemed visibly nervous, as if he would mess up the show, the 5-piece band played pop covers during breaks, but because regular band leader Fred Armisen was absent, Fred Armisen is the band leader of that show, they weren't allowed to interact conversationally with Meyers. This made them seem like a backup wedding combo, tolerated but not beloved. Meanwhile, the most jazz the studio audience ever got was when a young woman sitting in front of me spotted Lutz from 30 Rock in the wings. She yelped with glee, and Lutz gave us all a big wave. At the Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore on Comedy Central, I was seated next to some pleasant Minnesotans who'd been waiting outside for a full 3 hours before the show began. For their troubles, they got a warm-up comic making some feeble jokes about getting high. Poor Wilmore is still learning the ropes. You can hardly blame him for botching some segments, but still, the flubs meant that each segment, his monologue, his interviews, his end-of-show wrap-up, had to be immediately repeated. Pretend you've never heard the jokes before and laugh louder, a stagehand suggested. What stands out most when you watch its show live is its lack of fluidity. It's just waiting, retaping, waiting again. John Oliver didn't so much as glance at us after his pre-show greeting. He sat at his desk and stared straight into a camera lens while reading from a teleprompter, delivering gag after gag, as I disappointedly realized that we, the sad sacks in his tiny tiered amphitheater, were nothing more than a fleshy laugh track. Oliver was squarely focused on his real audience, meaning the TV and internet audience, instead of the weirdo schmoes who'd been ushered in to fill up the seats. That's disappointing in a way. I'm a big fan of John Oliver. I mean, the work that he does. Now, there's another article that came out. I don't think we'll have time for it today. Maybe we'll do it next week. But the folks at... which website was it now? I forget. It may not have been a website I typically watch, but somebody interviewed John Oliver and was talking about him being a de facto journalist. And I've said that before. He says that is an insult to journalism, and it's more of an insult to journalism than it is a promotion to comedy, as a compliment to comedy. So I thought, John Oliver doesn't like being called a journalist, even though the work that he does is... Now, he talks about the fact checkers and the researchers that they have on that show being there because if they get something wrong and then they make a joke, the joke collapses because the information was incorrect. I see that. That's logical. That's true. But compared to a lot of the other media outlets out there doing quote-unquote journalism, I feel like the work being done at the John Oliver show on HBO last week tonight with John Oliver is by far some of the most, and I've said this before on this show, it is the most ingestible and digestible shows. Compare the two things, and I said this before too. Citizen 4, the documentary, which I've watched several times and compare that to the John Oliver interview with Edward Snowden in Russia. The John Oliver interview with Edward Snowden was 30 minutes. The Citizen 4 thing was like 2 hours. I watched the Citizen 4 thing with my mom. I watched them both with my mom, actually. The Citizen 4 thing, in 5 minutes or less, had my mom going, what the... She was bounced out of it. It was too intricate and complicated, and she was a molecular geneticist. My mom is no slouch, My mom was a scientist for many, many years and is a bright, bright woman. But this internet, the internet culture sometimes stymies her. I think that's fair. I'm not insulting her by saying that, but she's not necessarily on board with Facebook or Twitter, that kind of thing. Social media, she's not into, and streaming video over the internet as opposed to regular cable TV is something she's not into really. But just straight away, I instantly noticed that the Citizen 4 documentary lost my mom in the first 5 minutes. It's not comprehensible to your average Joe, if you will. And I consider my mom above average, but if she couldn't grasp it or sort of be interested in it or attach herself to the material in a way that made her compelled to watch the rest of it, the filmmaker has lost her as a viewer. The filmmaker has not done his job. And John Oliver's interview with Edward Snowden made, in fact, I think it was going for the same points, you know, revealing and exposing what the NSA is doing, how they're doing it, you know, what these leaks are and how they're important to regular people. And John Oliver did it in a simple, direct, in your face, and hit you between the eyes with it way by making it about dick pics. Pictures of your dick on the internet. Can the government see them? How can they see them and why? They named more of the government programs at work in the NSA, software programs that are scanning our content and our material, our communication, and made it, I mean, you could understand it. You were compelled to watch every second of it. It was fascinating. It was hilarious. I cannot say enough good things about the John Oliver interview with Edward Snowden. If you missed it, and you're within the sound of my voice, I was going to say do me a favor. Don't do me a favor. Do yourself a favor. Go watch that interview with John Oliver and Edward Snowden. I believe it's free on YouTube legitimately. I believe they just put all of their good stuff up on YouTube, and it's by far the most impactful, horrifying, and hilarious half hour you will watch. I knew I had to watch the John Oliver show when I saw he was going 15 minutes over his usual time. I've mentioned this before, that for some reason noticing the length of Last Week Tonight had expanded to 45 minutes instead of 30 was a clue to me. I absolutely must drop everything else I was going to do tonight and watch this show. I was absolutely rewarded. And I didn't even know it was Edward Snowden. The guide on my mom's cable did not say what it was about. It was with my mom when I watched it, as I said. And I got to say, I mean, it is by far the best journalism I've seen, the best interview I've seen. And I watched the 2-hour-long, in-depth interview with Edward Snowden, and it was interesting, but it was not compelling. It was mildly fascinating, but it did not anger me in the way that the John Oliver interview angered me. I got angry when I saw the John Oliver interview and his interview with the public and how the public doesn't give a shit about much of it. But when it comes down to dick pics, they understand what it is. They understand why it's important that privacy should be had by them. They understand how instantly offensive it is when they don't have that privacy, and they want it stopped. Like it is bam, bam, bam. It is understandable, and it hits you between the eyes. I just keep going around in circles saying this shit, and I apologize. But, I mean, John Oliver himself saying that it's an offense to journalism to call him a journalist, I don't know. I don't think that's right. I think that he needs to just embrace it because he's doing better journalism than anybody else I've seen in a long time. All right. Last thing. Sesame Street. I'm pulling up the website here because I want to make sure we see the new Sesame Street set. M is for makeover, as Mashable.com said this week. And it's been a long time since this program has been on the air. Sesame Street. For its 46th season, Sesame Street underwent a makeover, but the neighborhood still looks like home. David Gallo is the man who is tasked with updating Sesame Street. The 49-year-old scenic designer tackled the redesign of the most recognizable set on children's television with a combination of respect for the past and fearlessness for the future. There's a look at it right there. I mean, it doesn't really look all that different, does it? Of course, it's got to be functional because we have Muppets to worry about and stuff like that. Mashable visited Elmo and Oscar the Grouch's new digs at Kaufman Studios in Queens, New York. Gallo played the role of friendly and gruff neighbor tour guide. As we tiptoed under Snuffleupagus snoozing in the rafters and over camera cables, the first thing we see is Big Bird's revamped nest. That's what this is here, Big Bird's nest. No longer tucked around the corner of 123 Sesame Street, Big Bird's home integrates with the rest of the neighborhood and reflects the philosophy of the redesign. Big Bird's nest was a dead end. I wanted to make sure Big Bird wasn't just stuck in a corner. We removed the construction doors. You have to remember the iconic things that we removed. this was that wall of old doors. That's gone now. What I wanted was for this not to be so much to be a dead end, but a part of the whole flow. So there he is. There's Big Bird and his mailbox. The set's new circular flow continues near Big Bird's nest, where he created an entirely new space behind the show's iconic brownstone building. Gallo expanded the area to create a community garden that looks like the small and worn green patches that dot New York's Lower East Side and East Village. Everything about the community was about being able to gather in the public space. So to me, that kind of urban planning was a big part of what he was going for. Last December, Gallo spent hours exploring the 5 boroughs of New York looking for inspiration. It all came from life, he says. There's the flower areas, the garden and stuff like that. There's another, like a fire escape, I guess, areas where people will sit and sing songs about colors and shapes and numbers and so on. The garden did undergo one change, a major scaling back of the foliage. The original design called for more vines, which Gallo removed, as he said it made Sesame Street look more like Planet of the Apes. So there's the flowers. The reinvention of old spaces continued with the set's previously unused carriage house that was reworked into a community center, complete with a city-friendly roof deck. It's an old space with new life breathed into it. I like that. That's kind of cool. I'm always fascinated at looking at sets, you know, like if you ever seen pictures of the Star Trek set stepped back where you can see the rafters and lights hanging down, you know, any part of a set where you realize there is the ceiling that you just automatically put in your mind there. The ceiling of the bridge of the Enterprise was not there in the TV show. It couldn't be because they had lights that they had to be hanging. This is in a studio or a soundstage, right? So when you psychologically put that ceiling in there, to step back in a picture or photograph, or live for that matter, if you ever have a chance to see a soundstage live yourself in person, it's a very jarring experience. Like, it's very, very weird and different, but it's very, very cool. And it gives it a reality that I feel like is kind of different than a lot of, you know, the stuff we just see on television and take for granted. Gone is the closed-off structure, replaced with a bright open place where you imagine sing-alongs and Grover's game nights. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge touches, including a child-friendly parody of the party game Cards Against Humanity called Cards Supporting Humanity. That's pretty funny. I see the word Hooper here. I believe that must be Mr. Hooper's restaurant or corner or something. Oh, there's Cards Supporting Humanity. Oh yes, Hooper's Store. Countering the newness of the community center sits Hooper's Store, a relic of the early days. I remember this very, very personally. The shop's rich history created a new problem for Gallo as he weighed up the option of a complete HGTV-style gut job versus preservation. Hooper's Store is another incredibly iconic location, and when I came in, it had been changed so many times, it was just sort of flat, and I felt like it had lost a lot of its identity. When it came to Hooper's, we talked about all kinds of ideas to modernize it, and this being the place that we could really modernize and make hip and slick. But I thought, or we could make it look like it did in 1968. And that is what it looked like in 1968. So instead of a blinding clash of steel and glass, Gallo embraced the store's history and added 19th century details, including tin ceiling tiles manufactured by an American company for more than 100 years. He painted the tiles a yellow and distressed the metal to give the space a texture it lost under years of flat walls and bland colors. There's the groceries. The neon sign is an added thing. First met with resistance, but Gallo persisted. The purple neon glow now gives the iconic Sesame Street corner an edgy vibrancy, balanced by the vintage awnings. I could look at these all night long, but in the May 10th article is on Mashable.com. I encourage you to see it. That looks like the, oh, there's Oscar the Grouch's can right next to a recycle bin. That's a new touch. When asked what he thought about some fans' vocal disagreement, Gallo simply says, "I like the fact that people care." Best reaction was from Bob, original cast member Bob McGrath. He had a look of relief on his face. We talked for an hour, and he, being an original cast member, was very nervous. But I think the producers had a real true vision of retaining the feeling of Sesame Street. For him to look around and feel like he was still on Sesame Street told me I really did my job right. Season 46 debuts this fall. And that's the article. So there you have it, the new Sesame Street. And I gotta say, my heart is warmed. You know, I very often get so nostalgic that I become tearful. This is not a moment where I feel like crying. This is a moment where I feel like, God, they did a good job. They revered the history. You know, they honored the franchise, as my friend Trunk says about Star Trek and why the new Star Trek movies are shit. All right, that is Media Watch Wednesday. Join me tomorrow for Anything Can Happen Thursday. You're watching cBas After Dark. Make it a great Wednesday night.